I'm going to show you my technique for taping up a last. Now, you might be wondering, why would someone need to tape up a last? And it is essentially the first part of the shoe design and pattern making process. So here is a last that has not been taped up, and here we have a last that is taped up. And what I mean by taped up is literally covered in masking tape. Now, what we're going to do from this stage is that we'll actually draw our design directly onto the last, and that will be the first stage of creating a pattern and then of course creating your shoe. But before we do any of that, we need to first tape up the last, and that is what I'm about to show you how to do. So you always want to start with a good quality masking tape so that it's nice and sticky, and the idea is that we want to coat the last with masking tape to create a nice thick layer that will of course peel off as one continuous piece. And we also want to really try and make sure that we avoid wrinkles as much as possible. But in saying that, it is a 3D curvy weird shape, so you're bound to have a few wrinkles, so don't overthink it. All different shoemakers will have a slightly different technique for taping up a last, and really when it comes down to it, it doesn't really matter what technique you use. As long as you cover the thing in tape and you keep it as wrinkle free as possible, then you'll be good to go. So I'm going to show you my way of doing it, and that starts with two small pieces of tape, roughly about 4 centimeters long, but it really doesn't matter, so don't overthink it. I am going to put it over the top, and I'm giving it a little bit of a stretch so that it's kind of going half on the toe and then half underneath the base. Now, this baseline of the last is called the feather edge. We can make it as messy as we want under the feather edge because we are going to cut all of that away at the end anyway. So our goal whilst taping up the last is to keep the top of it as tidy as possible, but don't even worry about what's going on underneath. So I've put one at the toe, half on top and half underneath, and I'm going to do the same thing across the heel. Okay, and just really pressing it nice and flat to reduce the wrinkles. And then we're going to put a piece all the way down the center front and down the center back. And really push it down into that curve that you get. When you're doing a high heel last where it's much more curvaceous in here, you may need to cut a few little slits in the tape just so that it'll open up nice and flat, and that's absolutely fine. And then when we go over the toe, just give it a stretch and really use your thumb to push it down so that your wrinkles are as few as possible. And the main rule here is really don't move on to the next piece until the first piece is completely flat. Now, if your last has marked on a back height point, we can bring that point with us as we tape it up. And the way that we do that is we place our tape over the back section, and see, I'm just giving it a little stretch like that. And then you can just sort of scratch out any wrinkles to really make it as flat as possible. And then I'm just going to take my pencil and draw that mark on there because I can see it through the tape. And with every layer of tape we put over it, we'll just keep drawing that mark on. If you don't have this mark, don't worry, because I'll also show you how to put it in afterwards. So at this point, I've got my first few anchor points in. I've got the two at the toe and the heel, and then I've got the center front and the center back. Don't worry if they're going on a little bit skew-if as well, because that really doesn't matter at this stage at all. There's a few more anchor points we're gonna put in before we start really layering it up. And the first one is just gonna go straight down the side like that. Again, don't overthink the angle. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't have to go to exactly any certain point. And then the same thing on the other side. The only thing that matters at this stage is that you are flattening out that tape as you go. Really using your palm and your thumbs to just really make sure everything is laying flat. Okay, and the next thing we want to do is we want to sort of pretend that that break in the last isn't even there. So we're going to put a piece of tape right over the top of it like that. And the idea, as you can see from this one, is that we're just going to sort of cover it up. So we're going to do the same thing on the other side as well. And I'm just remembering to keep putting in my back height point as we go. Okay, and that is it for my anchor points. So these points here are going to really help me to peel this whole thing off as one continuous piece. So once we have those in place, we're just going to start layering it up. So the next one that I'm going to place is going to go straight across the side like that. And you can just wrap it right over the front and at the back there. Now you'll notice here that I overlapped the tape about that much. We want to continue to sort of overlap the pieces of tape as we go so that we start to build up a nice thick layer. Now, if you've got a particularly curvy last and it's starting to get a bit awkward to make these pieces go straight, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter if they're not straight. We just want them to be smooth. And when we get to the bottom here, any excess tape, we just want to wrap over the feather edge like that. Now this is tiny, but I can see just here, there's a little gap that doesn't have any tape. So I'm going to put another piece just sort of over there like that. In fact, that was a bit long. And I'm doing it again so it's sort of half on top of the last and half underneath. And there's no particular rule about this, just if you see a gap that doesn't have tape, fill it in with tape. All right, so that side is looking awesome. I'm gonna do the exact same thing on the other side, and then we're gonna come back to the front area. Okay, so I've got the two sides totally covered in tape now. I've got a lot of end bits of tape at the back here, and this is totally optional. But I like to just put one extra piece over the top of the back just to kind of seal in all those ends of tape. I didn't always used to do this, and sometimes I don't, to be honest. I just do it on a sort of case-to-case basis. Once I've done that, I can again just bring my back height point back in. And now we're ready to do the front. So I can see again, I've got a little gap there that doesn't have tape. So I'm going to take quite a long piece this time, and I'm going to start above where that gap is so that I'm going over it. And I'm going to wrap the tape around the whole front of the last. And then I'm going to pretty much do that the whole way down. Making sure again that you're getting that overlap so that you are creating a nice thick layer. And I'm actually giving the tape the tiniest bit of a stretch every time I place it down, and that really helps to reduce the wrinkles. Now when you get to the toe area, it is going to be a bit wrinkly and there's not much you can do about it, but just try to really flatten them as much as possible. You can either use your fingernail or even the side of a pencil to just really sort of flatten them out as much as possible. And then I usually put another one on which mimics the very first piece I did, which again goes half on top and half on the bottom, sort of like that. Okay, so that is a beautifully taped up last. It's ready to be designed on, but before we could use that to actually make a pattern, we would need to remove all the excess from the bottom. So before I do anything, I always just take that off. So I usually do this with a craft knife, but just for the sake of making it really clear, I'm going to quickly draw on with the pencil so that you can see exactly where the feather edge is. The area where it can be a little bit tricky to see is on the inside curve there. Once you've gotten comfortable with where the feather edge is and you know exactly what you're cutting off, you can then go to your craft knife and just slowly and carefully cut away all the excess. Now you can cut right into your last, so don't be scared of getting the knife right in there. But also keep in mind, you're just cutting through a layer of masking tape. So if you're really pushing down, it might be overkill and you might be sort of putting yourself at risk of a slip. So just go around it nice and slowly and carefully. Once you've gone all the way around, you can do the satisfying part, which is to remove all the excess tape from the bottom of the last. All right, so that last is now ready to be designed on, and ready to be turned into a shoe pattern. Now, if your last didn't come with a back height point already marked on it, there's a really simple formula on how to figure that out for yourself. So the way that you do it is that you take a tape measure and you measure the length of the last, and then you divide that by 5 and add 5 millimeters. So in this case, it ended up being 51 millimeters, which shows me that this is roughly in the right spot. And for men's shoes, it's exactly the same formula, but instead of adding 5 millimeters, you add 7 millimeters. So it would be the length of the last divided by 5 plus 7. Now keep in mind, that is a sort of industry standard formula for finding the back height point, but of course you'll want to use your own common sense there. So for example, if it's a super pointy last, it doesn't work as well. You're going to want to go more from the area where the toes kind of end. And also you might find that when you're making shoes for yourself, you like to have a slightly higher or a slightly lower back height point. So this is really just to use as a really great starting point. I hope you found that video on taping up lasts helpful, and I will see you in the next video, which will be 3D designing directly onto the last.